you have his specimens in your
Right.
pocket. If we want to start running through
Well, I think it
any,
would be,
if we have extras.
yeah, I don't know that we'll have time today, but I'm thinking that next week, what we could do is take some of those trickier specimens that the South Dakotans have struggled with, and let's just go through them, well, because if one person struggles, that's likelihood is that other peoples are struggling with the same sort of thing. And so we'll go through a process of identifying some of these specimens, Andrenas, again, online, since we're, swimming in Andrena thinking.
Yeah, and
If
he's
that
done a
sounds
good
good.
job of like, we sent them a while ago and then we sent
Mhm.
them back when we thought in March, and then used all the information that we had done in our classes and sent a bunch back with like it's one of these three, which we always love. So
Yeah,
we'll be able to do real time learning.
yeah, I think that'd be fun.
All right, now it's
All
you.
right. All right, I'm going to share. We start with Andrena accepta, another one of several bees within this group that are big yellow composite things. I think mostly I want to say they are helianthus. I'd have to look it up again. And so the female is very easy to identify and interesting. Let me see here. We have a picture of the female. So the female is uh, different because it has two large yellow patches, very oblong, very well defined. Where am I missing it? Here we go. Um, that are in the paraocular area, quite high up it, not the little smudges we sometimes see. It's got a fairly long face to begin with, short fovea like a lot of the Callandrena do. But this is sort of very defining because this is dark. The clypeus here is dark and the paraocular area is yellow, which is very unusual, particularly at that level for females. So in the males, which we have on deck now, you see I have this little tiny little menu that keeps popping up and getting in my way. I don't think you can see it. But here's the same marks, right? So here's a paraocular area. But now also, so I should point out, this is a very old specimen. And this is probably discolored. So I would not count on in that fact that this might be orangish in the field. It's probably also yellow. And this is the yellow parts turn orangish. And there's been a number of specimens that have been claimed to be new species that are just completely cyanided specimen of another species more common. Okay, so when we look at this, we see these big yellow marks. So there's a vibe to this that I think is a big round head and would be probably in a place with tons of helianthus. And it's got this really interesting, that's almost triangular, a very long labral process. So the view is very distinct. Let's just do a quick jump to the guides here. So we'll restart the guide. And what we can do is we'll just say east of the Mississippi. That includes kind of everything, very generic. And then this specimen probably was found. Well, I should be able to tell you. I'll look at one of the others. In September, let's do that. So when you have an Andrena in the fall, that already eliminates a whole bunch of stuff. You can see when we click search that just that notion, and we score these monthly things extremely broadly. If we have specimens that go up in August to the end of August, we call it for September too. So we're already down to 41 species. And then if we go to that obvious thing where you have yellow on the clypeus and yellow in the paraocular area, and we click both, and you can see there's only 93 of the 500 that even have that should be able to knock this way down. So we're down to 10. We take a look here, we see, oh, a bunch of these are things that we've looked at before that are in the Callandrena group. Not all, there's Miserabilis, Personata, and additionally, I don't know about ignota. It is a Callandrena, but it's one of those that we don't see very much. And it might be one of those that are known from only a handful of specimens. Maybe there's one that's only known from one. It's possibly that. Female stylopies don't really count. And if you recall some of what we were looking at, a lot of these Astris asteroides, and then Miserabilis, Fulvipennis, they have just little smudges. They have a bright, big yellow clypeus, and then little smudges, smudgy marks to the side that are yellow. Rudbeckiae might have the largest, but nowhere near what we were looking at. But if we go ahead and say, okay, let's, in looking at this with some of our understanding, let's go ahead and hit simplify. And part of this guide is that we're not going to do it here. We're going to play around with this a little bit, but you can click these off. Okay, you can say, well, I know it's not Rudbeckiae, and then hit simplify again, and they're gone automatically. We're leaving them in, but as you become more and more familiar with the species, this is super useful, right? Okay, I can already eliminate. I don't have to go through the guide to eliminate. I know it's not Miserabilis and things like that. So we have tools that really speed up, or over time you just get faster. Okay, so one of the things that I should have done is I should have used the measurement of the specimen. So get my handy ruler out, because some of these things like Personata and Miserabilis are a whole heck of a lot smaller. So let's see what we got here. We have something that is going to hit 10 easily. So pretty firm on that. And if we had a more specific state, we could do that, but we don't. So we'll hit 10. It says 6 remaining, so we're going to knock out some on our list here. And now we go back, and we got rid of those 2 small ones, at least, that we were thinking about. And now we, looking at that, we'll hit simplify. And so we're simplifying again, making a new guide from what remains. And we still have lots of questions to look at here. And what I'm generally doing is, okay, I have a little bit of information already, and you guys too. I might look through these and go like, I like or don't like any of those. I can inspect this kind of information here for each of these kinds of things. I've usually scanned the specimen and look for any kind of outstanding things. One of the things that I believe I saw, so here's what I'm looking at. It's got very large, pale edges to the tergites. They're clear, highline. And I can't really see what we're looking at on screen right now, which is information about propodial triangle. I'm turning it over because, again, on a lot of specimens, we see things that are really interesting in terms of whether the S6 is how it's shaped. Is it flat? Is it upright? Are there teeth involved? All that kind of stuff. And what I am seeing, I have less than perfect light on this. Oh, that's better. Is a basically not upturned, but flat presentation. And there's a lot of hair there. I'm not going to do a super amount of inspecting. I can't quite tell if it's cut out, but I do notice that S6. So here's what's left in terms of the guides. And I'm going to go to the Andrena people we were working with when developing this, they really don't like abdomen, although I sneak it in every once in a while. They wanted metasoma, so I probably should change these all back to abdomen because that's what we use in the guides mostly. So here we want the metasoma S6 apex shape and lateral view, and a apex shape viewed from the bottom. So the lateral view, we either have reflexed or flat, but look, it was flat. There's only two that have that. We should be able to get rid of 4 and quickly go down there. So there's accepta, ignota, and Rudbeckiae. So we could continue this. And let's see if there's even a, so you can look on this part. I don't want to spend too much time here. We'll be doing this next week with Eric's material. But there seems to be no character that is absolutely separating out these three. I think they're pretty straightforward to do, so I'm not going to spend the time to do it. The fact that there isn't a specific pair at the end usually is an indication that the identification is straightforward. And you already got the vibe that says, maybe I'm looking at accepta. And if you had that in your collection, you could go and look it up. You certainly can look at pictures. Okay, so let's keep in that theme of things that like, let's see, helianthus sunflowers, which is a bunch of the ones that are left. So we have 2 more big things, helianthi and helianthiformis. Hint, hint, they are sunflower specialists. And helianthi sneaks into the east a lot more than helianthiformis does. So one thing we could do, we go back to the menu, and just as some help with looking at things, we could, oh, can we do that on this front page? We have to wait, I think, until, well, let's just see. So many little tools. Here they are right next to each other. Do those fair. We certainly can compare the differences. I thought the map tool would come up from here. We can do that automatically. Well, let's do it. So we can go to the global mapper, which is a link off of Discover Life, and we can just type in the 2. And then, and if I have spelled it correctly, spelled them both correctly, they should both map out on here, and they do. And you can, so sometimes things are, you want something to be more on top and more on the bottom. So you can see helianthi, which is all the way across here, is mapping underneath because it's first. And then helianthiformis is blue and is above that. And you can see it's really a prairie thing, restricted right here. And helianthi sneaks into the east, not very common. We just got our first specimen for Maryland just last year, I think, and on iNaturalist of all places. Not of all places, it's becoming more and more a good thing. So there's some more information. So even just knowing where you were would have helped with that kind of separation. I believe now going back to the guide, let's see, are we in Agapossum? Sorry, I have to get the header from the Zoom call away. So where is Andrena Mail? Okay, so as usual, we could click on helianthi and helianthiformis, and we can also do a has. So, and we could have looked in that differences section too, but so let's see if we have, I don't know that they, so if you look at helianthi, there is a character here that's just separating Aliciae, and there's not one separating the 2. If we go back, though, and look at our differences, that's sometimes useful. What you should see is a number of characters that have, so, okay, we'll just, helianthi is on the left, helianthiformis. So let's see what they say. We can then go to the species accounts and see what else is unique about them. But in looking at these 2, absent or indistinct pits and separated by 1 to 3. So we should be able to see that pretty clearly. There's some size differences. Helianthiformis gets averages a bit bigger, but there's huge overlap. Flight seasons are overlapping. Helianthi looks a little later, but huge amount of overlap. Antennal segments, these overlap completely between the two. These are interesting because this, as broad as the eye, are narrower on helianthiformis, so we can look for that as compared to basically a wider cheek. Not hugely wider, but wider again, near the middle of the eye for that clypeus with at least some yellow, paraocular dark. And this shows, and I think we have this, often the case in the group Callandrena, that you have a yellow clypeus, but that sometimes you have some yellow sneaking out. And I have, I think, 2 specimens of helianthiformis that have both of those characters, both with and without in the paraocular area. There's hairs. Now, clypeus impunct midline is present in one and absent in the helianthiformis. So there's a lot of things. This is why there's not a pair between those two. And rather than go through all of these, I think we are going to, although it's tempting, right? These are the same, emarginate, but not bidentate, entire and weakly emarginate. So this is a little more severe. They don't overlap. Mandible length, short, moderate and short, less than 1.5 to 2, 2 or more. So quite a, there is a little overlap, but this is basically going to have a cellared, a longer area to the back of the head to the ocelli. We got collection localities. Oh my gosh, it just goes on and on. So I'm going to stop because we just have a lot to look at here. So let's pull up helianthiformis and we'll look at what the information here has. First of all, in general, it has quite dark wings. In comparison, it's darker, but helianthi has pretty dark wings. So it's not going to be absolute. Now, if we look here, there's some notes. Some males have small yellow spots just out the clypeal area. And it's a summer mining bee, Asteraceae, and it says especially Echinacea, not necessarily Helianthus, similar to Rudbeckiae, but separated by these species by shiny pitted clypeus and dull in the others and darkened wings. So let's see what we can see here. And I'll put on deck a male, and the clypeus, just looking at the face, is very distinctive between the two also. I'm going to pull up one that has some of those. Like the first one I'm looking at has no yellow marks outside the boundaries, nor the second, but the third one does. So let's see what that looks like in this species. And also note the shiny, less dull, and it also should carry on to the rest of the body too. Nature of the species. Right, so here we are. It's reflecting a lot of light, as you can see, just from the light shine. Here's the yellow clypeus, and here it even has this would be the supraclypeal area, which I don't mention, but apparently it can have that. But here again are these yellow marks. The other 2 specimens I have do not have that. And if we look, can I zoom in on this? We can. And it's hard to see, but this should have had a unpitted midline. Let's take a look now at the back of the head. You can see up here, this is quite long, even at this angle. That's not the appropriate angle. The appropriate angle is directly vertical or directly at right angles. So we should see quite a distance to the back of the head, and that is very true. When we look at the abdomen, as was noted in the differences between the two, again, it's useful to have like multiple avenues. So you can see even from here that the pits on the tergites are really distinct. Like they just pop right out. There's some background um, markings, but not much. All right, so let's take a quick look at the wings, just because it's mentioned often in this species how dark they are. And then we'll pull up helianthi and do a quick comparison. So bigger species, darker wings. So darkness is a little difficult sometimes under these microscope shots, but you can see in general, this is smoky. This is even darker at the tip. Let's see what that looks like in our friend helianthi. Go back to the species account. Yeah, no other information. Here is what's LaBerge is talking about. This is a large summer species. It is perhaps related to helianthi, which it resembles in shiny and flattened clipius, and its relatively short, rounded labral process. It differs from helianthi in the dark wing membranes, short facial fovea in the female, dark tarsi and basitarsus, and sculpturing of the head and terga as described below. It is turtle sculpturing and short face of the female helianthiformis resembles Aliciae and can be distinguished from Aliciae by the dark wing membranes, the shiny clipius, and the shape of the basitarsus in the female. So now, when we jump back to the male, the one male I have of helianthi, we take a look at the wing, you can see very distinctly. So you could say, oh, maybe it's a little bit darkened, but pretty much it's all completely transparent and clear, whereas most of this is very smoky, and this, particularly the outer edges of the wing, were difficult to see through, almost opaque. We have a opportunity here to look at the tergites, and in the guide it said the pitting on here was obscure at best and absent possibly. So we'll look at T2, and I think if you look really closely, so first impressions, there is nothing there, right? But I think if we go really zoom in here, we can see there's some vague pitting, but basically it's really vague, and in comparison to the other, it's really clear that that is not the case. So you could see those long, clear, high line edges to the tergites, which seems to be prevalent throughout Callandrena. So as was mentioned, they both have shiny clipial areas, but this one does not have yellow markings, but the other species, helianthiformis, also does not have yellow markings in that area. Often, it's like 2 out of the 3 did not. We look at the top of the head, at the ocelli. Let's see what we got there. They should be significantly shorter. This is not the right area. So the distance to from the back of the ocelli to the head, that's a terrible shot. Let's see if I can change this a little bit so we get a better visibility of this. So it should be shorter than the quite long distance, up to 2 or more in the other one. A lot of hair going on here. So I think that's the edge, and that's the ocelli. It looks pretty long to me. Let's see if we can get a little bit different shot on this. Yeah. Okay, so this should be the pronotal collar running from here, and then this is, I believe, the back of the head. So this would be what they would call the vertex. Here's the ocelli, and it's not the central one because there's another one. And this actually distance, if this is indeed the edge, which I think it is pretty long. I mean, I would have a hard time telling the two apart in this particular case. So we have some very apparent, obvious differences in the amount of, what do you call it, of pitting in the T2. That should be a given. But let's go back here, and because, well, we can look at what Wally LaBerge has said. And it differs from helianthi and the dark wings. So we saw that. But sometimes dark wings can be difficult, but those are pretty distinct. The problem is if you have a helianthi, which doesn't have dark wings, sometimes you want to imagine that it does have dark wings. So this happens with other species too. When you have both together, it's like, oh, it's so obvious. But if you don't, pointing out again the need for specimens in everyone's collection, you don't. And short facial fovea in the female, which we don't have, dark tarsi and basotarsus. So I am unclear. I guess the alternative, well, we can see if, because it's not talking about male or female, but it's talking about dark tarsi and basotarsus. So that's in helianthiformis. So in helianthi, it should not be dark. And when Wally mentions something, it's usually accurate and significant. Every once in a while, I can't see what he's talking about. Okay, let's take a look here. A little bit difficult to see because there's so much hair and goop from age, but I'm trying to get a look at this. I think under the microscope, which I might take a do, we've got a lot of pollen on these things. I'm having a hard time seeing, but this one looks like a pretty good shot. So they mentioned dark basotarsus. So here's a basotarsus, right? And the other ones have on the other, I think this is the front legs. And it looks like the ends here, at least on maybe the entire portion of the basotarsus, are lightened and orange or orangish yellowish. I'm a little bit hesitant about this just because of the age of the specimen, but that does seem to be the case. Let's just bring in helianthiformis and see if we can get a shot of the basotarsi. This is a fresher specimen. So when we look here, we can see, oh, it looks like a front leg again. Here is it should be the tibia. So tibia there. This is hard to see. Basotarsus here, and it does look like that's all dark. We don't really have that same look and feel. If we go back and look at our pairings in the differences section, we were scrolling through here and we saw several things, some of which we've already seen. Let's see what we have further down. So here's a difference in helianthi, the first one. It's the S6 is flattened, and in helianthiformis, they're reflexed, so they're bent back from the below point. So I have helianthiformis on the slide deck right now. Let's see if we can see that. So yeah, we can even see it probably from here at this distance. So if we take a look, this is where we're going. So this is the sternite, so the underside, and this is the S6 area, and this is the part here at the very end that often does things that are useful, like get flipped up. And I think it's pretty obvious here in compared to some of the times we've tried to locate this feature, is this is clearly upturned and not just a continuation of the plane of the rest of the undersides of the sternites. Well, now let's see if that feature is not there in helianthi males. Doesn't really occur in the female. They have no genitalia that are visible in the same way that males are. And here, okay, so this big feature here, that's S8 that's poking out. So S8 is coming out of the opening. I'm not sure, this would be part of the tergites. We're looking upside down. This is the rest of the sternites. And so you don't, in this area right here, you don't really see anything that's upturned. To be more firm, let's do a quick little twist to more of a lateral shot. You can find the specimen. There we go. And what we would see, as we did in the other one, is this. So it's a pretty good view. So here's the plane of the sternites, and it pretty much continues. There might be a slight rise, but not much. Whereas in helianthiformis, it comes to here, and then it's 90-degree upturned. I think of it as like a bend in a piece of sheet metal. It just comes up and it goes across the entire face of the rim. So the whole entire rim is bent up of the specimen. This is not there. So again, we're sort of looking at these things as completely as possible. Here's S8. So the helianthus has a possibility of being more bidentate, but these other categories completely overlap. So it's not the one that we would probably look at. Here, again, a lot of overlap. Scutum hairs, dulled. So scutum is going to be a little shinier in helianthiformis. Again, not a huge difference. A lot of overlap here. Stigma side also overlapping. So I think we have plenty enough here to separate the two, even if we don't see a difference per se. Okay, my last specimen, and then maybe we do have time to go into at least one of Eric's specimens, or at least start talking about it, is a mysterious species that I have never identified, I don't believe, in the field at least, Andrena crawfordi, and these are from Texas. And I think probably, well, let's look at the map. Probably they do sneak into the east, but not in areas that I hang out. Rid of that. But it is a, oops, a forward eye in the same subgenus. Okay, interesting. What is going on with this one record? So what an odd distribution. Here's Texas, obviously, and then you have this snaky line looking like between tallgrass prairie and midgrass prairie areas, and then some oddball records. Are these state right? What is this one? So you can click on these things. Well, that's from the revision, and someone from the University of New Mexico transcribed these, and they said in Transylvania County in North Carolina was one of these mistakes are come from, these would have been transcribed from LaBerge's revision of Callandrena, or whatever his student was that was working at it. So it does look like, and some of these are just records for the state. So North Dakota, yeah. Anyway, you can see where most of them come from, which is not a place, an area that is heavily collected, I would say. Uh, so that seems to be a strong information about what its preferences are, but we should be aware that the species could show up anywhere. Okay, so we were talking about males. So with this species, which we might just kind of parse through the keys, the interesting thing is that it has no yellow on the clypeus. So there must be something about the females. I can't remember the details on subgenera and what makes them be in a subgenera and not in most cases. Mostly I'm focused on jumping right to a species level ID. Okay, this is a relatively small species, more like Simplex plicata within the Callandrena group. And this is old and dirty to some extent, but you can see not a stitch of yellow on there. So let's jump to the guide. And Claire, I can't see a clock here. So tell me,
About 10 minutes.
10 minutes? Okay, I think that'll be good.
And then
okay.
in your little, in the cheat sheet, in the species page, it's comparing it to Krigiana. So that is an opportunity for back and forth.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I have just very limited experience here. Okay. So, let's see. Is this the Andrena guide? No. I have so many things open here. Agapostomums. Is that it right there? Yeah, there we go. Okay. So let's learn these things. Let's go back to, let's restart. Let's take a look at what was on the species page for crawfordi. Just click on the name. And a lot of times, so there's a type specimen from the Smithsonian. So female, very bland. And we have the information in here from LaBerge. Says small species closely related to another Western species and Krigiana, and shows relationship to Krigiana. They're oligolegs, so they're specialists on the chicoria. So those are the hawkweed and chicory plants, sort of weedy things in general. Crawfordi can be distinguished from Krigiana by its larger size and black male clypeus. So when we were looking at, which I don't have specimens with me, Krigiana, that would be pretty obvious because the males would have yellow clypeus in Krigiana, and this clearly has no yellow at all. This tells how to tell the females. Male differs from that of the other species, and in Callandrena, presumably has an unflexed sixth sternum, so that would be the rim edge that we were just looking at. So it would be flat, and the lack of subapical fimbri on sterna 2 through 5. So when they talk about fimbri, usually, and I don't know the full definition, but usually it means a band of hair at the edge of something. So in this case, well, and this says subapical, so that would be near the end, so near the apical end, near the rim, we would often call it, but apparently not on the rim. So we'll take a look at that. Male is also shorter vertex than the other two. So let's take a look at the fimbri, because that sounds intriguing. So it lacks subapical. Well, I was kind of wishing it had it, but it's lacking it. So we should just see random long hairs on the underneath of the sternites, and that appears to be the case. So no banding, no clear band of usually paler hairs, denser hairs there along the rim. And it had, this area was flattened, and it's a little difficult to see from here, but usually you would see the edge, sharp edge pointing up, and this is all completely flat. This is quite a deep notch, although that was not mentioned in looking at that. And here is S8 sticking out from underneath, and it has quite interesting billowy hair on either side. Again, not mentioned, so I'm not sure how significant that is. Let's take a quick run at this in the guide, just keying it out. So first of all, as a guide test, let's see if it's listed as being in the east at all. So eastern bees, it should, because there was something. There it is. It is. So, again, we already know the answer, but every once in a while, the guide isn't completely up to date on state or other kinds of presence. So this one case, it passed that test. I'm not going to bother. A lot of times I do this just to be broad and just to see if we run into any generic issues. I don't include the state when I'm doing a lot of my keying, particularly if I kind of know what it should be. So we're leaving it throughout the area. Date-wise, this is probably a midsummer if it's on that particular group. And indeed, here it is May. So that probably eliminates early May at that. Some of these other species, now we still have quite a long list, with 109 on there. We can look at length and see how much that helps. It is neither super large nor super small, so that usually means we're in the middle, and we'll score it for both 10 and 11 millimeters. And we'll let that update, but it's not going to change much. So if you look up here, you can see 86 to get rid of some things. So we have both entirely dark. Also, 316 tells you that is the most common state of a male random Andrena. We only lost 10 species. So vertex height, I believe they said short for the group. And in looking at this, I'm not going to show it to you guys. It looks pretty long, so I'm going to go, gosh, it's almost 2. So I'm going to score it for over 2 and just under 2 to be safe. So first of all, I'm looking to see, and there, crawfordi is still there, so good. Now, so it could be that, but it could be that. So you try to be as conservative as possible initially in any kind of identification stream. Crawfordi is still in there just because you might make a judgment call, or someone else might have made a scoring judgment call, particularly in these less common species. The reality is, if you can't tell whether it's one category or the other, you really have to do them for both to be honest about it. So I'm going to skip the eye. Let's see what the labral process, another fine character for most Andrena. Sometimes you just can't see it though. So on this one, I am seeing something that's either marginate or weakly marginate. So marginate meaning there is a concave cutout in the labral process. 36, so we're making progress. Crawfordi still there. I think the mandibles are not very overly long, and they do overlap, so it's short. Darn it. Earbuds are in the way. Just got them. Very fun. 18, no pronotal collar, presumably because I think that's a feature of the group. And indeed, it's still in there. We're down to 15. This is very much a wheedling process. Let's see what we have for propodial triangle. What I'm looking at is something that's relatively rough, kind of bumpy, rugose, if you will, throughout, and basically doesn't seem to have any outstanding. I'm looking at the very edge, and I don't see anything. Let's see if that is true. I'm often leery of the zero thing, but it seemed to be zero. And look at that. There it is. Okay, so we can hit simplify now, but we only have, these are often good characters, the banding abdomen things. So we're going to look at, are the hair bands complete? Do we have pits that are obvious? And is the surface granular, which is often associated with the amount of pitting? So I definitely can see pits. They're pretty shiny. In fact, I would call this shiny. And then the pitting distance here is somewhere on the order of 2 to 3 pits apart on average. So that fits there. Let's look at shiny first. So if I do smooth, what does that do for us? Got rid of 1, down to 2. If we do separated by 1 to 3, still those 2. And then if we look at hair bands, I'm not sure there were any. So we have a melandrena. One could argue either way. There is a vagueness to the hair bands. So I could, well, I'm going to just play, right? So I'm going to just say, okay, I think they're absent. What happens? And we just have nivalis. But also, I could have said it's broadly interrupted. And it's crawfordi. But really, I should do both because I wasn't 100% sure. Because there is some hair banding on the sides, but it's I would call it weak. It's not a big solid mat of hairs. It's just slightly denser. But clearly the scorers thought it was too. So at this point, I'm just going to hit simplify. What's going to separate crawfordi from nivalis should show up in this next set. And we do have quite a string of characters here to play with. One is just the location. So nivalis, much more eastern, and crawfordi, much more Midwestern. In fact, if you look here, only Kansas, Iowa, so there's a relatively few states that have both listed. Most are really going to be listing just nivalis. But some will be too, so let's pretend like we're going to ignore that. And so other locality information, not a germane, sculptural, propodial triangle, form of sculpturing. I'm never super sure about this one, so I'm just going to go, okay, here's a good one. Look at this, all separate, unless one or the other is not scored for this. Head, antenna, length of first flagellum. Okay, so this is in comparison to the subsequent ones, and very difficult to tell because they are gone, which is a reason to have this kind of guide. Let's see if so if only one were scored, there would only be one there. See if it gets rid of. Okay, they're both scored. So that's a good character. We just can't access it. Malar area, again, we have a lot of ones, all ones, so that should help separate things out pretty well. And what do we got for malar area? So we're comparing the rim of the eye to the gap between the mandible and the eye. It is either 0 or really short. All right, let's start with extremely short and see what we get. crawfordi. Let's add in short up, but then nivalis comes in. So, I could have gone with either. I was leaning this direction, but I'm going to be safe and keep going. So face, hair color. So I've got pale and then a couple different other options. I'm going to skip that. And I'm no fan of this particular character, and it's indeed has a middle ground that's both our sternum 6 surface hair. So we looked at that a little bit. Dense across entire margin, forming a band that contrasts with sparse basal hairs. No, it has various not as above. It's doesn't have a dense tuft either, so that's not useful. And if we knew the subgenus, we could tell them apart. Not useful because we're pretending we don't know. Scutum, pits area. This is maybe useful, but there's this middle ground there. Let's just see, because pitting often can be difficult to
We
see.
are going over time, but you can keep recording. We're all good.
Okay, all right. And so I couldn't really see the pits because there's so much hair here. So now Metasoma 6, apical margin viewed from bottom, so from above. This, remember, we noticed this, that there was a margination, a cut through on there. So this should give us crawfordi, and it does. I thought I could look, but I'm trying to wrap this up. But was it notched? Or was that nivalis is notched, right? Should be nothing. So yeah, it wasn't probably notched. Subgenus Callandrena, well, we already know it's not a Callandrena. And these are Callandrena characters starting with nivalis, and that's it. So I think, it would have been, it's pretty straightforward to get it to, we already know the answer, which is sort of cheating, but I think one could pretty easily get to crawfordi. And fun to explore a species that I have almost no experience with. All right, well, we're beyond our time, but I'm available. Do we have any questions?
No questions, and our friend needed to drop off a little early anyway, so the timing worked out.
Okay. All right. Well, next week we are going to play with Eric specimens and do some CSI of real, trying to identify things for real.
Yeah.
Anything else? Anything else, Claire?
People are welcome to open up their mic if they want to, but nothing's in the chat. All right, people are dropping off. Bye, everybody.
Okay, right. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Sam.